Good evening, trustees. I hope that you can all hear me at this point, in spite of the weather and connectivity issues and whatnot. I welcome you to this meeting, and I call the meeting to order officially. And I would like to ask the director to take roll call, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. This is our roll call for our special board meeting of September 2nd, 2020. Trustee Barry.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Cram.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Danaher.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Jacobs. Vice Chair McPherson.
Present.
Thank you. Chair McAllister.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee McCray.
Present.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Trustee McDonald.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Parisian.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Schooler.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Swan.
Present.
Thank you. Student Trustee Evans. Student Trustee Hughes. Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you, Director. I'm not sure if this is the right time and place, but I want to make a few comments. I'm going to mute here if I can. I want to welcome, it's my pleasure to welcome as chair and on behalf of you, the trustees, to extend a very sincere welcome to our new student trustees, Kane Hughes and Jordan Evans. These trustees, student trustees, were sworn in officially yesterday in two separate ceremonies, one at North Dundas and the other at Tierra Leger at Smith Falls. Director Sliwa and Trustee Liaison Officer Lisa Workman and I gave them a brief orientation, and we chatted about realistic ways that they might bring the student voice to the table. So I welcome you, student trustees Kane and Jordan. A second announcement I want to make is that the September 9th board meeting will be held at the boardroom physically, with all the social distancing and hygiene procedures in place. Thirdly, I have received many letters, as have you, trustees, over the past few days. The concerns of parents and staff are genuine, mostly positive and heartfelt. As chair, I am doing my best to respond to them individually. I am hoping that this evening's reports, presentations, and discussions will go a long way to provide some clarity. We are working with a totally new model, and we are breaking new ground without a true and tried result. We must not fail. Let's proceed with courtesy, patience, and understanding. We are living in a period of great uncertainty, but are following the directions and the directives of the Ministry of the Environment and the Minister, as is every other board in Ontario. We are all in the same boat. the issues of structure, routine, confidentiality, privacy, anxiety, dignity, which have been brought to me by parents, are very real. With our plan, we will succeed. I now turn the meeting over to Director Sliwa to, pardon me, we are now going to item 301, which is the approval of the agenda. I have a motion moved by Trustee Swan, seconded by Trustee Schooler, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the special board meeting agenda of September 2nd, 2020. Trustees, I would ask you to cast your ballots, please.
Chair McAllister, that motion does carry.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? Hearing none, we're going to move to Article 5.01, which is an update on school operations in the Upper Canada District School Board. And I will now turn the meeting over to Director Sliwa to introduce his team and their reports as this first agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Our first update report this evening to the board is an update on school operations, and specifically the updates to the Return to School Operations Guide that was originally published and circulated to our staff and was accessible to the public on Friday, August 14th. Tonight, Mr. Chair, you'll hear from several of our staff who will be updating and outlining the key changes, just to bring that to the attention of the members of the board in case they are fielding questions from the public at large, and also so that you know what has been some key developments that necessitated this update. I'm going to begin, Mr. Chair, by turning this over to Superintendent Coombs, one of our superintendent of schools, and as a senior superintendent on our team, who was, along with Superintendent McNair and Perry, instrumental for coordinating these updates. So over to Superintendent Coombs, and then Mr. Chair, after the presentation, we'll welcome the board's questions.
Thank you very much, Director Sliwa, and good evening, and through you, Mr. Chair, good evening, trustees. I will be giving an update regarding the school reopening guide. As has already been mentioned, and you are all aware, we are in an extremely dynamic situation, a very fluid situation, and that things change on a week-to-week basis, if not on a day-to-day basis. And so we want to make sure that the operation guide that we have put out to schools and to families reflects our best information, our most up-to-date information that we have at this time. I am going to highlight several areas of the guide that have been updated, and then of course we will open it up to questions where my colleagues will assist me in answering them. First and foremost, of course, as brought to you last week, we have a delayed start and a staggered entry. Those dates and those particulars are reflected in our new reopening guide. There's also updated information regarding our quadmester, including a new secondary school calendar. Because of our delayed start, we have updated our quadmester calendar to ensure that we have a balance of instructional days over all 4 quadmester. That is also included in your package for your review. Later today, Superintendent Rudders will bring an update on remote learning. That update is reflected in this reopening guide. We do have a operational outbreak protocol, which we have received from the province. It's entitled Operational Guidance COVID-19 Management in Schools. At this time, Superintendent McNair is working alongside our medical officers and our medical health units to update our local protocols for infection prevention and monitoring. Included also in the guide is an updated parent screening tool, and that has been that has been circulated to parents. Of particular interest, of course, I would say would be the mask exemption form and policy procedure for students. That form is also included for your review. And in certain circumstances, there may be some students who are unable to wear a mask. We would anticipate and expect that all of our students from grades 4 to 12 are wearing masks on the first day of school, and that those in younger grades are strongly encouraged to wear masks as well. However, there may be cases, individual cases, certainly of disability, where a mask exemption is required. We will require parents to complete that exemption form before the first day of school. We will also be asking our principals to report and document those cases so that we have accurate representation of the data going forward. We do have new protocol regarding our wellness room, so this would be included anytime we have a student or a staff member that does fall ill over the course of the day. We have an updated procedure that Superintendent McNair has been working on, which does talk about what happened when that does occur, and the procedures we have in place to isolate and to ensure that we have the safest procedure possible. Included also in the new reopening guide is a link to our new revised companion guide for special education, and as well as a transition to kindergarten guide. That, of course, is being led by Superintendent Perry. Again, as you can imagine, this document is a living document. It's a fluid document. We do know that more information will be coming forward from both our health units as well as more directives from the Ministry of Education as they are warranted as we get into the fall. And of course, we do anticipate that we will need to make adjustments based upon the best information we have at that time. That's my brief report, but I would turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and any questions you might have.
Thank you, Superintendent Coombs. I will open the floor for questions, please, trustees. And I note the trustee liaison officer is going to feed the speaking order. So, who wants to lead off?
Mr. Chair, you have a question from Trustee Swan.
Go ahead, Trustee Swan.
Hi, I thank you through you, Chair. I just had some questions about masks in regards to, and it's not in the guide because it's in regards to our staff. And if teachers or other staff can't wear a mask for medical reasons, I'm just wondering what protocols have we put in place? I'm not sure if this would be an HR question or not.
Through you, Chair, it's Superintendent McNair, and I'd be happy to answer this question for Trustee Swan.
Thank you.
Through you, Trustee Swan, we, HR and myself and Public Health are working on that procedure and looking to align some of the information we have learned and put in place for exemptions as for students, as Superintendent Coombs shared with you moments ago. So we are in the process as we speak to finalize and create a flow chart and communicate to our employees the expectations if they are unable to wear a mask as required by the province. And we will be communicating that to our employees in the very near future once we put the final pieces on this protocol.
Just a secondary to that. So we don't know yet if a teacher that can only wear a face shield because of medical reasons will be in a classroom with our students. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. Trustee Swan, some of those, because each employee is so individual and potentially their medical conditions are so unique, we would be looking at those with human resources on a case-by-case basis.
Next question, please. There are no further questions on this item. If so, I would like to proceed to Article 5.02, which is an update on remote learning model in the Upper Canada District School Board, September 2nd, 2020. And at this point, trustees, because I've been involved in this in a different way, I'm going to ask Vice Chair McPherson if he would chair this portion of the meeting so that I may be able to address some of the issues and questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The update in remote learning model in the Upper Canada District School Board, item number 5.02, and it will be presented by Superintendent Bill Lowshaw and Susan Rudders. Lady and gentlemen, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, it's Susan Rudders here, and it's my pleasure to be with you again this evening to provide an update on our implementation of remote learning for the 2020-21 school year. And if you recall, at the last special board meeting on August 26th, we shared that we were engaging a new approach to serving remote learning in the board. The decision to do so was in direct response to some key understandings that really challenged the efficacy of our initial plans. And those challenges were that 20% of our students selected remote learning in the virtual school for the start of the 2021 school year. And our efforts to reorganize schools and assign all available staff to virtual school teaching assignments would still result in the need to hire an additional 160 new teachers at a cost of approximately $16.5 million, an amount beyond our capacity to finance. Securing these additional permanent teachers would be unlikely given the available educational workforce in Eastern Ontario and would impact our ability to adequately serve French language instruction. And parents provided us with clear indication that the ability to move between learning models with fluency was of significant value to them, and in our preliminary model, staff could not assure the opportunity to do so. So since our last meeting, we've taken a number of steps to implement our plan for remote learning, which includes 3 specific variations required by the Ministry of Education. The plan we've adopted is aligned with what parents clearly demonstrated was important to them regarding the ability to move fluently between remote and in-person programs, and with our ability to staff all required programs in a manner that would allow us to maintain fiscal responsibility and a fulsome program. So our synchronous remote learning option enables students learning from home to remain connected to their home school and to participate synchronously in the same class or courses they would be taking at school with the regular classroom teacher and with in-person peers. All remote learners were provided with the option to request an exemption from synchronous learning, which was a requirement as part of PPM 164 from the ministry. And students applying for this exemption will be served through the virtual school in either an asynchronous digital program, so online, or an asynchronous non-digital program, pen and paper. And late today, we were able to confirm the number of students requesting the asynchronous program through the exemption process, and all of these students will be served at the virtual school. So the number of confirmed remote learning students overall was 4,675. The number of students requesting an exemption from synchronous learning was 1,805. And so those, as I said before, will be the students who will be served through the virtual school in an asynchronous program, 1,805. The breakdown of that is about almost 1,300 elementary students and a little over 500 secondary students in asynchronous remote learning. And this would represent a need for approximately 78 full-time teachers in the virtual school to serve both the elementary and the secondary programs. And so, of course, then by elimination, there are currently 2,870 students who will be studying synchronously with peers, learning in person at their home school. In addition to confirming the desired remote program for each student, we have produced and distributed resources to support building a shared understanding of the multi-level remote learning program that we must provide as per the provincial mandate. And these documents are provided for review as detachments within tonight's agenda, and they include the UCDSB Remote Learning Guide, and also an addendum or an additional document entitled Remote Learning, What It Is and What It Is Not. And we certainly hope that these resources have provided our students and parents and staff and you as trustees with greater clarity regarding the remote learning model. At this time, further communication with all staff regarding the 3 models of remote learning is a key priority for us. All Upper Canada staff participated in remote learning training in today's professional activity day. And in addition, staff from the distance learning team, the teaching and learning department, and special education department are collaborating to develop a series of 10 remote learning modules for staff use and review during the period of September 4th to 10th, with a focus on the key actions and the key strategies they will be required to engage to fulfill their roles in the remote learning model and to get up and running for the first week of when we can receive students. We are currently investigating an additional support structure with ongoing timely access to resources and coaching so that we can assist staff to build capacity and confidence as they establish their synchronous and asynchronous practice. These more recent initiatives are complementary and in addition to the existing UCDSB distance learning staff portal, which is a shared MS Teams site initiated for the participation and collaboration of all of our staff during the time of school closure in the spring of 2020. And this site houses a significant collection of professional development training resources relevant across all teaching divisions and subjects K-12. And again, most recently in August, our system staff facilitated summer institutes, which was a full week of voluntary training in the technology tools and pedagogy of remote learning with a combined attendance of over 900 staff members. And I think it's really important to note and to provide our sincere appreciation to our staff who took the initiative, showed interest and commitment to actually engage in training sessions that were offered voluntarily during the final days of their summer holidays. So we certainly appreciate their initiative and their commitment. Since adopting the current model for remote learning, we've recognized increased interest in our commitment and our capacity to ensure privacy and safety of students participating in synchronous remote learning experiences. And while the school closure and as a result of the pandemic in the spring and our current directives on school reopening for this school year have brought synchronous learning to the forefront, it's really important to note that e-learning, the use of digital tools within the classroom, and the growth of synchronous learning models has been part of the UCDSB landscape for quite some time. Some key indicators of the growth of our capacity as a board to use and engage students with digital tools includes, first off, the growth of our asynchronous online summer semester program. Since 2014, we have witnessed an increase of 1,700, almost 1,700 students participating in online learning during summer semester. In 2014, we had 442 students taking online learning in the summer. And this year, we had 2,100 students taking online learning in the summer. As well, since 2015, we've grown the number of asynchronous day school e-learning courses offered in Upper Canada from 39 to our current 56 courses per year. And we have a robust student participation in other asynchronous learning e-learning courses offered by other boards as part of the e-learning consortium, of which UCDSB is a member. Over the past several years, we've committed as a board to developing the district-wide timetable model for the purpose of providing our secondary students with more equitable access to courses, regardless of their geographic location or the size of their school. And aligned secondary timetables and bell times across the district enable us to offer courses synchronously online for access by all UCDSB secondary students. We ran a very successful pilot of 4 synchronous courses in semester 2 of 2020 and had expanded the pilot to include 8 synchronous courses for the current school year. We're committed to continuing to expand this model post-pandemic. Interestingly enough, in our long-term planning around the implementation of a district-wide timetable, a key milestone was to create a UCDSB virtual school to facilitate greater access to courses via synchronous e-learning, and to do so by the beginning of the 2021 school year. Our current circumstances have resulted, of course, in the realization of that goal, albeit to a much larger scale and with some new challenging parameters. But it's essential for us all to recognize that we've developed our approach to remote learning over time, and that we have the capacity to meet the current circumstances together one day at a time. As our interest and our commitment to online learning has developed and increased over time, so too have the policies, procedures, and guidelines that we use to support privacy and safety in digital learning. In an effort to promote greater understanding of the variety of tools at our disposal for this purpose, we've compiled them into a single resource entitled Maintaining Care, Support, and Privacy in UCDSB Remote Learning Programs, and that is also attached to your agenda item for tonight. And as stated, these have been developed over time to support our commitment to engaging students in 21st century learning models in a safe and supportive manner. And we will continue to develop and to grow these resources as technology changes and as new opportunities for students to access learning present themselves. So our priorities moving forward with regard to the design and the delivery of remote learning programs are as follows. We are committed to ensuring that students and families continue to have the ability to move fluently between remote and in-person learning during the 2021 school year. We're committed to providing staff with all available supports to deliver the synchronous online delivery model and also to deliver the asynchronous remote learning program models with specific attention to pedagogical practices. We're also committed to further enable all of our teachers, all of our educators to become familiar with each platform used to support remote learning program delivery and to understand and promote our district guidelines to ensure confidentiality and privacy. And we are committed to ensuring that any program delivery models provided by the board align with current resources available to us at this time. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions that trustees may have at this time.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Okay, I've got a speakers list already, beginning with Trustee Swan. The floor is yours.
Sorry, I have a motion put forward. Should I be putting it forward now? I already sent it in earlier today or after the discussion.
I would wait until after the discussion if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I didn't put a question forward yet, though I will have some. I'm waiting for the other trustees to see their input. I didn't put my name on the list.
Okay, moving on to Trustee Danaher then.
Thank you very much, Chair McPherson, Vice Chair McPherson. I have a comment and then I have a question. My comment is that this pandemic has forced all of us to change the way we do things in all aspects of our lives. We all know that. It has forced us very difficult decisions for us, our parents, our students, and our staff. I am uncomfortable with our planned approach in terms of privacy issues. I do not want to minimize the seriousness of privacy. There are many students who, for a variety of reasons, cannot be videoed. Privacy must be respected for each of our pupils as teachers support student learning. I do not feel it is appropriate when we are placing undue pressure on our teachers to provide regular classroom instruction and management, while at the same time expect these teachers to deal with online streaming. My question is, does our plan contravene the collective agreement with either of our teacher federations?
I'll direct that one to Director Sliwa, and he can perhaps direct it where he can get the best response. Director Sliwa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. We'll ask our Superintendent of HR, Superintendent Ferguson, to comment, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So in response to Trustee Danaher's question, the position of the board is that we do not believe that this approach and this plan violates the collective agreement for any of our labor groups, and that's our current position.
Follow-on question, Vice Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
I guess to you again, S.O. Ferguson, have you checked this with legal, or is this just a feeling or assumption that we have?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have consulted with legal about this. We've been consulting with legal about all sorts of situations in this unique time we find ourselves in for the last 5 months. Safe to say that we've certainly had some friction points with collective agreements with union groups. We're doing things that collective agreements didn't anticipate, and so there are many instances where we have differences of opinion and where, as I say, some friction points. And so in each of those cases, we have been reaching out to legal. We base our opinions on legal and on the professionals on our team. And again, to our current position is that we do not feel that this infringes upon or is in violation of any parts of our shared collective agreements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next on our list. Trustee Barry has a question, and Trustee McAllister, Chair McAllister will present it on his behalf. Go ahead, Chair McAllister. Did we lose John? Okay.
Sorry,
Yep, go
I
ahead.
am here.
Yeah,
And
floor
I
is
hope
yours.
that, does Trustee Barry still want me to pose his question on his behalf? Anyway, here's the question that Trustee Barry asked me to present. And it was the following. Does the director and the superintendents or the superintendents know of any other board that is having classroom teachers teach both a group of in-class students and at the same time teach synchronously to another group of students?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll ask Superintendent Ferguson to comment because he's been key in terms of checking on how other boards are trying to navigate this practice. So I'll turn it over to him.
Director Sliwa, I think Bill Loshaw actually has the latest information on that. I know he was looking into that and he shared that with our team today. So perhaps Superintendent Loshaw might be able to comment on that.
Through you, Vice Chair McPherson, I am aware of another board that is running a similar model at the secondary level. And that's a neighboring board of ours that we're connected with through our association with the Eastern Ontario Staff Development Network.
Okay, does that answer the question? Okay. Trustee Parisian, you have a question and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. I actually have two, but I'll limit it to one, and if I can come back around a second time, that would be great. My question is I've received a large amount of concerns from parents regarding the safety and security of their child or children is there a way, or what is the procedure for parents to go through should they not want their child on camera? And have we put in place so that students just will not be on audio or on video while the teacher is live streaming in the classroom?
So through you, Chair, it's Susan Rudders. I can probably address that question, and then I may also seek some input from Superintendent Loshaw as well. So thank you for the question. So with regards to what measures are we putting in place, we are certainly in the process of developing the opportunity for parents to indicate their permission for their student to participate in any kind of video conferencing within the classroom that could potentially occur. And that would be similar to the publishing of photos consents that we've used, consistently for many, many years. In addition, I think it's really important to bring some clarity to the concept of live streaming and really what that looks like from our intentional perspective in the classroom, because I do want us to dispel any concerns or around the fact that there is a camera present in the classroom that is constantly scanning and able to take up the conversations, behaviors, actions, and faces of children in the classroom at any point in time. And so that is certainly not the intention of the model whatsoever. And I would like to turn it over to Superintendent Bill Loshaw, who really has been, preparing our staff centrally, helping to support the preparation of training for our teachers over the next week, to really emphasize that particular understanding that it's not about live streaming the entire class. It is about maintaining a connection with students at home so they can participate successfully in the learning. So could I turn it over to you, Superintendent Loshaw?
Certainly, thank you, and I'd be happy to add some more comments in an effort to address the question. So as trustees are aware, synchronous learning happens in live real time, but it really is important to note that we will not have cameras filming an entire class. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about live streaming, and I believe that for many folks that brings about a connotation of just that we would be broadcasting live every moment of every day into the homes of anyone who would like to be viewing that. And so I appreciate the opportunity to provide some clarification. Instead of what I just described, then classroom teachers will use the video or audio or chat features of board-approved video conferencing platforms such as Office 365 and more specifically, probably Microsoft Teams, as we're using right now to facilitate remote synchronous learning. So in many ways, and we discussed this previously, online students could be considered as a small group of students in the face-to-face class, and teachers or EAs or ECEs could assist these students periodically as they would with any other group in the class. In terms of privacy, only those who are invited to the class Teams meeting would have access to the video or audio conferencing that is taking place. And as well, and Superintendent Rudders just mentioned this, parents must provide consent at the beginning of the year for a student to have his or her image shared via MS Teams or any session that they were taking part in. So children who cannot be videoed would not be videoed. And a couple other points that I would make as well. Remote learners may use the camera function to participate using audio only. And as well, it's recommended that microphones within a team site are muted when the remote learner is not speaking, similar to what we do on our calls. So hopefully that's helpful and that it answers your question.
Does that satisfy your question, Karina?
It does. One follow-up, if I may. I'm not sure if it's a follow-up though, but maybe I'll squeeze it in.
Yep.
If Superintendent Rudders has it. I know that you mentioned that there are 2,870 students that are signed up for the sorry, want to say it's synchronous learning, or it's the live stream. How many does that actually account for in classrooms? So how many classrooms do we potentially have that will have that we have students participating in?
So through you, Chair, I really can't tell you at this point in time exactly how many classrooms that applies to. We're still crunching the data, honestly, with regards to the breakdown by class and by school. However, in some of our earlier, models, like when the initial information came down that was not necessarily about selection of asynchronous or synchronous, there seemed to be an even spread across the grades in our schools with regards to, it wasn't all grade 2 students or it wasn't all grade 5 students. And depending on the school, there could be multiple grades, a grade 1, a grade 1-2, a grade 2, a grade 2-3. So it's difficult for me to pin down exactly how many classrooms are impacted, but we certainly have an understanding of how many schools would have students participating synchronously and to what degree. Just not available tonight, but I could certainly get that information for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Trustee McCray. You are next on my speakers list. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. I'm opposed to it, so I'll start off that. But I think this is a viral pandemic, and there is bound, from what I can gather, to be a second wave coming. And our teachers are the de facto frontline workers now. And that's a matter of affecting people's lives. And that's a very difficult, onerous task to put on them and putting their own lives to risk. And I see that as a very substantial obligation that they are going to have to do. And secondly, the children returning to school may be bringing a lot of new and different challenges to those teachers that are in the classroom. It's going to be a very difficult time for everybody. And I think that to load them on with having to do synchronous learning to a separate cohort would be one task too many. Now, I can certainly have misgivings about privacy and safety. I think that's, in this modern age, we know we've seen our emails hacked. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And I think basically I want to say that I'm opposed to this because it puts too many tasks on the shoulders of those teachers coming back in very unusual times. I'm prepared to bring forth a motion to that effect, Mr. Chair, at your discretion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. On to Chair McAllister. You're next on my speakers list, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. There have one of the common themes that have been brought to my attention by parents and teachers, for that matter, is the fact that there is the issue of confidentiality, privacy, and the resulting anxiety and discomfort of students and their dignity. And I think these are very, very real issues. I guess what I'm asking is that a teacher, the educational assistant, and or the ECE for that matter, or any other support personnel in a classroom are working with students in their particular class. So are they unrealistically being asked to divide their time between their in-class students and those online? And how would this work? Could someone explain this to me, please?
Through you, Chair, it's Susan Rudders, and I believe that Superintendent Loshaw would like to speak to that.
Certainly. So thank you for the opportunity. So certainly I'm not suggesting that what I described previously would be an easy task, but we do have very highly skilled educators in our system. and it's certainly a bit of a dance, but as Superintendent Rutter said, this is not new for us, and it's being developed over time. It perhaps is rolling out at a scale greater than what we would typically look at within our board. However, in an emergency situation like this, then that's currently the plan that we are looking at in terms of moving forward. In terms of what it might look like in a classroom and splitting time between those students who are face-to-face and those who are online, I would want folks to understand that certainly what it might look like over the course of a day, and I'll try to paint a picture of what this might look like. And I'll choose a secondary setting just by way of example. So in terms of what, and maybe in painting this picture, we could look at what students are doing and what teachers are doing. So as students might enter the classroom, or those who are at home, they're preparing for the day. Those coming into the classroom are washing their hands, arriving in class either in person or joining a Microsoft Teams meeting, for example. The teacher might have Microsoft Teams set up and online. There may be a visual schedule of the day visible for all students. The learning goal may be posted, and there might be some type of minds-on activity that students work on independently until the class is about to start. From there, the class would begin for those who are face-to-face and online with materials posted, possibly the learning goal for the class. And the lesson might begin with possibly a discussion about connections to the learning goal for the day. And then might move on to some type of direct instruction for all students, those face-to-face and those online as well. From that point, then there may be assigned work where the student then observes, engages in conversation with students, checks in on their understanding, and there's opportunities for guided group conferencing and to provide students with feedback. And that could happen both by circulating throughout the classroom and by checking in by those who are on a Teams call. And so within this synchronous learning, I would want everyone to understand there would be an element of independent work as well, just as there would be within the classroom. And so it's a bit of a dance, as I say, but it's not that our teachers devote every minute of every day to a specific student or small group of students. They monitor and they support as necessary, and we see that happening both face-to-face and through a platform like Teams.
Chair, could I ask a supplementary, please?
Yes, go ahead, Trustee McAllister.
So, based on that information, am I correct in saying that there's no live streaming of students in the classroom?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's all a matter of how we interpret live streaming. And I think initially when we were hearing the language of live streaming, that's what was bringing about the notion of cameras in the classroom and many of the privacy concerns that were coming forward. Through what I described of using Teams, then as I mentioned, only those involved in the class Teams meeting would be invited and a part of that session. And of course, with that, then the teacher would have the ability to mute participants would have the ability to mute and also to use audio and not full video as well.
Thank you. Okay, moving down our speakers list, Trustee Schooler has a question.
Through you, Chair. Just picking up on what Trustee McCray said, hopefully not, but if in the event that there is a COVID diagnosis in a cohort in one of our schools, then that would, as I understand it, that would result in that cohort being the entire cohort, the student that is diagnosed for sure, but the entire cohort would be sent home for a period of 14 days isolation. So with this current model, would it be a fairly seamless transition to provide instruction for those students who are now at home for 14 days? or how exactly would that situation be handled as seamlessly as possible?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'd like Superintendent Rudders to speak to that because that's part of our scenario planning as well.
Thank you, Director Sliwa, and through you, Chair. So you're correct that if there is an occasion came up where a student, where several students, where an entire class was required to be at home, either due to illness or precautionary around a 14-day quarantine, the capacity for us to continue with learning in that scenario, given our current model, is very great. It simply involves the entire class then moving to the remote synchronous learning opportunity and using our suite of board tools such as MS Teams or D2L if that's something the teacher is engaging as a tool as well. So in all honesty, the current plan it helps us in the circumstances of illness for one student, many students, an entire class, but it also sets us up quite well for the future, and we all hope this certainly doesn't happen, but a future possibility that we have to be cognizant of is that we could end up in a situation where we are all assigned to home again and schools are closed. And in that event, we would already have an established presence for every class in each of our schools in our distance learning platforms, our foundational platforms, and all students would have been participating to some degree in utilizing those platforms and all of the components and the functions of them. So we are, with the current model, setting ourselves up for all scenarios that could be upon us in the school year ahead.
A follow-up question through you, Chair, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Irregardless of COVID, I'm sure that in the history of our school system, unfortunate as it is, a student at some point has contracted an illness or sustained an injury. Has there been any history of live streaming that has already been put in place to accommodate students in this particular situation?
So through you, Chair, as a system-wide approach, I would say less so. I would, though, suggest that on a case-by-case basis, we certainly have had staff who, for example, a child potentially has to be in CHIO for a few weeks, that rather than just sending paper materials back and forth, that we have implemented the use of online platforms to share information and to connect with students about their learning on an individual basis. So the capacity is certainly there to do it. In many years ago, and I would think to some extent, it's probably still been customary to send home some paper copies of materials for learning, but we have, not to sound like I'm quoting a movie, but we have the technology now to make that learning experience for students who are unable to be present in our schools so much more direct and engaging through the use of technology. And I just think that what this represents for us moving forward as a result of what we were doing last spring with synchronous learning and the challenges that we're meeting this fall, we're really looking at a potential new approach to serving students who are not able to be with us face to face.
Another follow-up, if I may, through you, Chair. So,
yes, go.
Sorry, as I listen to the answer to the question, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there have been some instances of a teacher providing a live stream option for a student who is in some situation that does not allow them to be at school. And so recognizing that perhaps would be a little bit more work for the teacher, has that been a real onerous task and a real problem for that teacher to provide that service?
So through you, Chair, I really can't speak to, the personal feelings of the teacher with regards to having engaged in that work. But I do think it's probably been reliant on that teacher's comfort and capacity with digital tools. And I would suggest that we as a system have grown so much since the spring of 2020 that we are increasing our capacity across all of our employee groups to work in those environments. So I think we're still on a growth pattern with regards to that. And I think, like all organizations, we have employees who are at different places on a continuum of learning and comfort with that. But it's certainly our intention that we would provide the support for all people to continue to grow in that capacity.
Thank you. Moving on. Next on my speakers list is Trustee Parisian, and you're up.
Great, thank you. Through you, Chair. My question is I've received here is that now instead of, I know we've talked about the capabilities of moving from one scenario to another, but as the asynchronous learning has a teacher cost to it as well, how easily can students move from the synchronous to the asynchronous should the parents feel that potentially one doesn't work as well as the other?
Okay, go ahead, Superintendent Rudders.
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much. So certainly the model we've adopted here is our what we believe provides us with the most fluency for students to move from one model of learning to another. And we would, of course, be bound by collective agreements and the class caps with regards to placing students in the virtual school. But remember, at the same time, we will likely be seeing movement of students from virtual school to one of the synchronous or the face-to-face options. And so we can certainly be constantly monitoring that balance in terms of our class caps and our ability to do that. And then on a case-by-case basis, we might have to make decisions about addressing any staffing needs that do arise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next speaker is Trustee McDonald. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear the concerns of the parents. I hear the concerns of our teachers who have been adamant in sending messages as well, and I hear the trustees this evening. But based on the information that is being presented, I mean, we've made some assumptions prior to hearing the information tonight about what the virtual environment would look like. And quite honestly, the information that's presented tonight is really reassuring to me that individual students are safe. We aren't going to be having cameras all over the place. In fact, it really is the connection that we're looking for, and we've heard it in different ways that we want to make sure that the students that are at home are staying connected with their class. And sometimes the camera may be on so that the student can see the teacher. Sometimes the whiteboard capabilities will be on so that a teacher can demonstrate certain activities so that all students will be able to see it, whether they're at home or whether they're in the classroom. But for the most part, the audio will be on, and so that the teacher is able to talk and have group discussions with the students. It's just going to be a location change for some students. And I think when we look at the model that's being presented, it really allows the greatest amount of flexibility for families as we move through this process. And we hear some concerns about what happens if we have a second outbreak. I think this model really allows that flexibility, and Superintendent or Trustee Schooler, kind of alluded to this, is that it allows for that flexibility for students to move from school to home, home to school, and maintain the connection with their teacher and maintain their connection with their regular classmates. And so if we did have an outbreak, then those students would be going home and still be able to maintain that connection with the teacher and with their other classmates. There's nothing says that we can't do that learning continuously, even though there might be an outbreak. So, I think this model really does allow for us to have that flexibility provide the confidence to parents that the learning experience will be very similar if they're at home, very similar to what they would have if they were in the classroom, by making that connection stay consistent. I think when we look at the tools and the resources that are in front of us tonight, the capabilities that we have, we are able to make this work. And I think it really requires us to put that in place and to make sure that we understand that we're not compromising the safety or the privacy of children to do this. I'm confident in the fact that what superintendents have provided to us tonight is a well thought out, laid out plan that will allow us to provide the best education for the kids given the circumstances. If we had our way, we wouldn't have to deal with any of these things, but here we are. We have to deal with it, and we need to provide the model so that for individuals that aren't comfortable with being in school, they're still going to have that best experience possible. When we look back and we talk about one of the things that might have been presented in the past in the other model, cameras were still in play. I mean, students were going to be on camera, but they would have been with students from across the board and with a teacher that may not have been known to them, and not having that connection. So I think what we have in this model really allows for that connection, that care that is established by that regular teacher that they would see, and that will continue through the school year, and maintaining the connection with the students. I'm amazed at the ability for our students to be able to pick up Microsoft Teams or any other social media platform and stay connected to each other, regardless of the age. And I'm very confident that our staff have really put a plan in place that allows for the best model to be put forward, and continued professional learning opportunities for our kids to be in place. And I think this is a great opportunity that we can lead the province and show them that we have a model that will really work regardless of what happens. And I commend the team for having come up with this idea and putting it forward. I think it's a great model, and I think we should be proud of it as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee McDonald. Next on the speakers list is Chair McAllister.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I certainly echo Trustee McDonald's comments. I think they're very wise and based on a lot of experience, and I appreciate that. I'm going to ask a question which has already been answered, but I want to ask it so that it is crystal clear. There are two questions. One, and this is based on the many emails that I'm attempting to respond to at this time concerning their concerns, and they're very real. And here's my question. Is my child in the classroom going to be videoed? Yes or no?
Go ahead.
Through you, Chair, it's Susan Rudders. Your child will not be videoed in the classroom unless you have provided express permission for that to happen. And videoing in the classroom will not be the entire classroom included in any kind of video taking place.
Supplementary, Chair?
Go ahead.
I know I'm beating a rug here, but question: as a parent, if I have not given my permission for my child to be photographed or videoed or whatever, will this be respected? Yes or no?
Through you, Chair, we will absolutely respect the requests and wishes of parents with regards to videotaping children.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Cram, you're next on my list.
Right, thank you, Chair. I don't always agree with Trustee McDonald, but certainly in this case I do. I do have two questions. During the streaming, and I'll use the word streaming because I don't like the word live streaming as we are proposing to do it, because that live streaming is what's giving us some difficulty with what we're doing. So I'll just use the word streaming. of the lessons that the teacher had, and the teacher is the administrator of that program. Does that teacher have an option to collectively disallow the camera option to students who are online?
Stop laughing. Just keep one foot in front of the other. Uh-oh. John? John?
We're getting some background here.
Just kicked that once again. From the family.
Okay. I will refer that to Superintendent Rudders, perhaps.
So I would like to defer that question to Superintendent Hobbs, who has responsibilities for IT. I believe I know the answer, but I find him to be much more specifically versed in the capacities of MS Teams.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Superintendent Hobbs, the floor is yours.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just beg your indulgence, if Trustee Cram could just go through the specific question again. I just caught the tail end of it there, as I was kind of, I'll confess, I was preparing for my report delivery.
Okay, Trustee Cram, can you repeat, please?
Superintendent Hobbs, basically is, does a teacher in the classroom have a collective ability to disallow video taping?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that one of the things that catches us up a little bit here is the sometimes the nomenclature we're using. So first of all, recording is definitely not the default posture of Teams. So that's when we use the term videotaping, I just like to make sure we're clear that we're not recording. And the second thing is that teachers do have broad control over both their camera and the actual controls over the individual students. So, I probably could delve into your question a little bit more deeply if we could maybe talk about a specific scenario. But I think that generally speaking, there's hardly a scenario, having conducted probably hundreds of Teams meetings of various sizes over the course of the last several months, where the presenter, who would also be the teacher, wouldn't have explicit control over those kinds of things. And I think it's also important to note that the students themselves, as meeting participants, have control over whether their camera is turned on or off, all the way from the controls that are present in Teams itself to putting tape over the camera, as many people do as well. So, both from a technical standpoint and from a functional standpoint, we're quite, I think, satisfied that our users, both presenters and participants, have a broad suite of controls to control the privacy that they're comfortable with on a sort of ongoing basis.
Second questions, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, thank you.
If a secondary student is taking in-class instruction during the first quadmester and things are not going well for any reason, how easy will it be for them to switch to remote learning for the second quadmester?
Through you, Chair. So I just want to get some clarification on the question. So there's several descriptors here. So if I'm a student learning face-to-face in first quadmester, at any point in time in that quadmester, I could move to synchronous learning, where I'm still connected to my class and I'm able to learn from home synchronously. So that's option one, and that movement from synchronous to face-to-face is practically seamless. It's really a conversation at the school level because the student already has a place within that course. If I'm a student learning face-to-face in quadmester 1 and I decide I want to move to an asynchronous model in quadmester 2, which means I'm electing for an e-learning opportunity that doesn't involve me connecting synchronously on a regular schedule during the day with the teacher and my classmates, then we would certainly need to discover from a secondary perspective what course was the student wanting to take, and is there room in that course, or what options are available to the student to engage in for the second quadmester. So a little bit more dialogue and discussion and planning will be required, but I certainly see it as being reasonably possible for us to do that, of course, with a bit of notice and our ability to look at available pupil places within courses.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, moving on. Trustee Swan.
Hi, thank you. I have a question before I put forward my motion. And my question is about the audio component. And I'm especially concerned, which pertains to my motion, about the elementary panel, because it appears by the numbers we're given on the synchronous learning model that the majority of the synchronous learners are in the elementary panel. And I mean, tonight's a great example about the audio, and teachers can turn it off or people can turn it off. Well, we have a trustee right now that has their audio going, and not to blame them because it's easy to do. Last week, I accidentally turned on my video and my 14-year-old told me to tape something over it. So even if I accidentally do it, now my camera doesn't work, which I've done tonight. So I'm just wondering, or I'm just concerned about how we're going to deal with the kids for various reasons. Whether they be in the classroom or at home, but mostly I'm talking about the in the classroom learners, that their audio isn't on there.
Through you,
on top
Chair.
of the video.
Through you, Chair, it's Superintendent Rudders. So as Superintendent Hobbs was speaking to the capacities of MS Teams, and so not only can students at home turn off their audio or turn on or off their video, but the teacher in the classroom has the ability to turn off the audio on their computer where they are connecting in an MS Teams session with students learning synchronously, but they also have the capacity to shut down the audio at the other side as well. And you would have noticed a few moments ago when there was some background noise happening that we actually have a staff member, Derek Castleman, who was managing this meeting much in the same way that a teacher would manage a meeting. And he was able to turn off to mute essentially the audio so that we could no longer as participants hear that sound in the background. So I would envision that in a classroom, when a teacher's engaged in providing direction, some direct instruction, the audio would be on. And that would be a time where students would be listening into what's happening. But when we move to it's time to do some actual work related to the concept, so if students are working independently or potentially in groups, those students working online, once again, the audio at that point can be muted because there's no direct communication necessary. It's work time. And so the teacher would then come back, turn that audio on to confer with those students who are learning synchronously, to check for understanding, provide feedback on the work they were doing. And then when her check-in with that particular group was finished, she would simply mute the audio again. So the camera wouldn't be facing the class or the students, and the audio could be muted when there wasn't direct instruction taking place. So I think that there are more control measures with regards to what's being heard by whom and when than perhaps that people understand at this point. And that I think is a real good indicator for us as a staff of the need to really expand our messaging and our communication around the capacities to ensure privacy within the MS Teams environment.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Some of it, yes, thank you.
Okay. My speakers list has still got names on it, so we will deal with the speakers list and then we will come back to your motion, okay? Chair McAllister.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I know I asked a question about this earlier with regard to videotaping of students and children in classrooms. I have been asked to ask this question. If a parent does not give consent, he or she is expecting that also means my child's voice. My child isn't comfortable with that idea. So does any kind of live streaming in the negative involve both video and audio?
Through you, Chair, I just want to make sure I understand the question. So you've indicated a parent may be concerned with her child's audio being heard by people who are connecting synchronously, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So certainly, if there's a discussion happening in the classroom, for example, so a teacher's doing some direct instruction and she's posing questions to students to develop their understanding and move the lesson forward, it is possible that a child could answer and the students at home would want to have the benefit of their participation in that discussion. So while they wouldn't see the student because we wouldn't have the camera face to the students, they might hear the conversation taking place in the classroom. I'm not convinced that necessarily they would be able to identify the specifics of whose voice that was. But in order for dialogue and discussion to take place in the classroom, I do feel that there would be a reasonable chance that a student studying synchronously would hear the answers in a teacher-led discussion that are happening within the classroom, but potentially they might not, or they may, if they're close to the person speaking in terms of their relationship, identify who the speaker is simply by hearing the voice.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Rudders.
Thank you. One last call for questions from the table on the presentations. Okay,
Bill,
hearing
Bill?
that. Yes,
John,
go ahead.
John McCrae.
Yes, go ahead.
After hearing, I wonder how Derek would like to, and doing a great job of this. I wonder how he'd like to do it if he had 20 or 25 kids to manage, and also to make sure that all the protocols for COVID were in place at the same time. Thank you.
Okay. No further comments or questions? If not, we shall move on. We have a motion.
Chair,
yes,
I have one.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. Can you control who is on the line so that no one not on the list is able to access the call?
Okay, we'll hand that off to.
Through you, Vice Chair McPherson. If I
yes,
understand,
go ahead.
If I understand the question correctly, Trustee Cram is asking if the teacher can control who is on the call, and it would be similar to our Teams meeting this evening, where only those who were invited to the Teams meeting could access the call.
So supplemental to that, my interpretation of your answer is that the general public cannot access what's happening in the classroom.
Through you, Vice Chair McPherson, that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Swan has a question.
Hi, I just wanted, through you, Chair, this is for Superintendent Loshaw, or Superintendent Rudders. We just got the breakdown tonight. I had asked for it earlier today and didn't receive it because I know it was coming in. And I'm guessing, am I correct? And I have two questions. Am I correct in guessing that the numbers of synchronous learners could be high because some people haven't responded yet because they didn't get the email? And my secondary question to that is, how many synchronous learners are in the JK to 12 model versus the the JK to 6 model versus the 7 to 12 model, which is a question I did put out this afternoon, but was unable to get an answer to. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, it's Superintendent Rudders. So certainly, in terms of your concern that individuals did not receive the email, you yourself, Trustee Swan, had flagged that to us, that you were aware that you yourself had not received an email. And so we immediately tried to look into that circumstance because we wanted to ensure that we understood what had happened there. And what we discovered when we went back through all of the manual, distribution of data from the surveys and into master schedules and master databases, there were 61 out of 4,675 individuals who, due to a clerical error, they did not get copied over from the survey data and into the master schedule. And we really appreciated your ability to let us know that that had happened so that we could investigate. We immediately sent out a follow-up email to those 61 families, explaining the error, providing the information, and offering them the opportunity to either fill out the survey within the timeline or to contact my office and our executive assistant in that office to provide their request, and we extended that deadline for them until Thursday morning. So you're correct. There were 61 individuals whose data was not included in the exemption survey. However, we have provided that opportunity to them, and the differential in terms of the results would simply be within that 61 people. And I'm sorry, could you clarify what your second question was, Trustee Swan?
My second question was, how many synchronous in the JK to 6 model versus the grade 7 to 12 model? Because it sounded considerably low. I think you said 500 in the secondary, but if I could throw in the 7 and 8s into that, just wondering kind of a further breakdown there.
So through you, Chair, at this point in time, we have the overall numbers and we have them broken into secondary and elementary. We have a team of folks who are continuing to work throughout the evening tonight to try and actually isolate those numbers by grade and to help us have a better understanding of what that breakdown looks like. So we don't have that information available at the current moment, but we certainly would be happy to provide it when it becomes available.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our speakers list keeps getting longer. Trustee Parisian, you have the floor.
Thank you. I've received a question and I would like to ask it. For students from junior kindergarten to grade 2 that the parents have selected the remote synchronous learning, as it would involve them potentially sitting in front of a computer longer and their attention span might not be as good, or they may not be able to hear their peers because their voices are smaller in class. Do we have, are we sort of looking at that as a unique situation or differently than maybe the grades 3 to 6? Or maybe will that have to wait until the numbers are released to have a further review?
So for you, Chair, I'm going to certainly give my perspective on that, and then I think we could also ask if Superintendent Loshaw has anything further to add. In the kindergarten level, certainly, the intention in the synchronous program is that connection to the regular classroom and to the activities of the regular classroom, and so. But we recognize, especially in our primary grades, the attention span of our students to sit in front of a computer for long periods of time. That's not advisable and it's not good pedagogy. So we absolutely will be working with our teachers to counsel them on strategies to really ensure that we're chunking what's happening so that there's maybe a 10-minute opening exercises kind of activity with the whole group, where the student is listening in and may have the teacher may be on camera for the student, and then the teacher may assign a certain activity at home, well, in the class that the students would do independently at home, not necessarily still with their audio or on, but actually, you know, engaging away from the computer in some kind of active task. And then, you know, more coming back to the group at a certain timeline. And of course, what we do understand as well is with our youngest learners, they're probably they have the greatest level of support because they will be in the company of an adult in their home who will be helping to guide them through the expectations and the learning tasks that the teachers are providing, and will be helping to guide them back to the group, the class at points, and then allowing them to take that break that's scheduled in terms of good pedagogical practice. And Superintendent Loshaw, did you have anything to add to that?
Certainly. So thank you very much. I agree with Superintendent Rudders in her comments, or with her comments rather, about the need to chunk the activities with our younger students. I believe we have a lot to learn from our teachers from the summer learning program who worked with some very young students and their families. This year, as some of you may be aware, we had over 600 students sign up for our summer learning program, which was taught synchronously. And so in that situation, these are young students who would have had support, and the structure of the program would have been as Superintendent Rudders described. What I would add is that the parents who are supporting would be supporting at certain points in time to help their young children get started and set up, of course, and to provide support as needed. But that would be done with the communication, between the parent and the teacher, so that the teacher was well aware of who was supporting at the time.
I have a
Thank you.
follow-up if I may. Oh,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sorry, my follow-up would it then be the plan that teachers provide maybe a weekly or a bi-weekly schedule to the parents of maybe what the plan is, so the parents can make sure that the proper person is there to support this child with the technology that they have?
Through you, Vice Chair McPherson, one of the expectations that we will have in place is to ensure that communication of a daily or weekly schedule is communicated to parents, and that way, and this is for all learners, so that folks are aware of basically what the schedule looks like, and when synchronous learning activities are taking place, and when students are learning independently, and if there's asynchronous part of the day as well, they will know when that activity is occurring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee McCray, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is the way the things might happen, and I'm playing the devil's advocate for a moment, is that someone would have taken screenshots or recording devices in the individual homes. It's maybe not likely, but it's possible. And that's how it would be recorded. Thank you.
Okay, that was a comment, duly noted. Okay, once more around the horseshoe. Is there any further questions or comments on tonight's presentation?
I have one last one, please, to bounce off Trustee McCray's.
Okay, go ahead.
I heard that did happen in the March to June area, and parents, my child's first synchronous learning experience, and took a picture of whatever platform was being used, and then posted it on social media. I also heard of students, and I only heard of this recently as a result of this model. I've heard of students posting it on TikTok. So I wonder, and I did read in the documents tonight, but it really wasn't spoken to. So I'd like the superintendent or superintendents to speak to this on what our communication will be, that this is unacceptable, and what will the penalties be if children go against or parents go against the code of conduct or in regards to privacy of information. Thank you.
I'm not sure I'm going to allow that question. You're really reaching out there. You're getting into operational, you're basing it upon hearsay. And if you have concrete evidence, it should go through the proper channels. So I apologize, but I'm going to overrule the question. We have one more speaker, Trustee McDonald, and then Trustee Parisian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear some trustees and still seeing lots of comments about privacy and concerns. And I just want to clarify, and maybe I'm not understanding this completely, but if the model that we're presenting is having students who want to learn remotely be at home and be paired or within the cohort of the regular classroom is a concern with a camera, if we didn't have that child paired with the cohort class, they would still be learning remotely, but with other students that are learning remotely, and a teacher would still be teaching them on camera. Is that correct, Superintendent?
So through you, Chair. So just to clarify the question, if a student had selected to do asynchronous remote learning, your question.
No, synchronous. So what I wanted to get to is if the model that we have today shows us that we were going to have students with their home classroom, but a suggested model by some would show that we would have teachers teaching only virtual students. Would there not be cameras involved in that process as well?
Through you, Chair. Yes, Trustee McDonald, in the model we first examined, where all students who wanted remote learning were attached to the virtual school, there would have been a synchronous program. There would have been a class of students with a teacher, and the expectation would have been that that class of students would be online with the teacher, connecting synchronously through audio or video, potentially maybe through email to some extent as well, for 225 of the 300 minutes in an instructional day. So the same tools and the same use of potential use of camera and audio.
Just to follow up, if I may, Mr. Chair. So the current model that we have then, in the one that I'm in favor of, allows for that flexibility, allows for that cohorting of classes, but on a smaller scale of students that potentially would be learning from home. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, yes.
And for the concerned parents that might have, those issues around privacy, whether it be video or audio, they have an alternative method as well that they could adapt to, which would be the asynchronous model, which would be very similar to what was introduced in the spring. So those students, their sons and daughters, wouldn't have a connection with the school on a day-to-day basis as if they were doing it synchronously. So they would get stuff sent home to them. They would work on it and submit it. Is that correct?
That's correct, through you, Chair. That is correct. In the spring, initially we started with an online connection and telephone connections as well. Midway through the closure in the spring, the Ministry of Education did require synchronous connection on a regular basis between our staff and our students. And so we saw an increasing application of the very technology we're talking about today for synchronous use of MS Teams, use of email, and that sort of thing. So we were familiar in using that model in the spring, but asynchronous as it exists in our current model for virtual school is that they would have materials posted either online in a D2L environment, or they would receive paper packages at home to work on. It's submission of tasks with some check-ins through email or potentially a phone call from the teacher, but there really is no daily required synchronous interaction.
And just a final follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. Some of the things that we've also heard is connectivity issues and some students not having the capability to connect to the classroom. Would we have the capability, and we have some on this meeting tonight, but would we have the capability for students to call in and be part of that classroom in our current model that we're proposing and putting forward, so that at least they can have a phone connection to the classroom and still hear the teacher and still be able to collaborate with their fellow students?
So through you, Chair, I'll give a brief answer, and then I will ask Superintendent Hobbs to also weigh in. As again, I've said before, his knowledge of our tools as with responsibility for IT is much more comprehensive than mine. But certainly, we do have call-in numbers for our MS Teams meetings. A student whose computer wasn't working that day or was having difficulty could phone that number and connect through the teacher's computer, just as some of our participants tonight may be using their phone to call in and participate in the meeting and are not actually doing so through a device or a computer. But I'll turn it over to Superintendent Hobbs to confirm and perhaps expand on that.
Thank you, Superintendent Rudders. The Superintendent Rudders did an admirable job reflecting of what the technology capabilities are. The only nuance I would add is that currently teachers aren't licensed up for that call-in capability, just because normally they wouldn't have occasion to use it, but we are in the process of licensing up teachers so that students can use a landline phone or another phone to dial in when they have data capability, and expect to have that in place within a matter of weeks, like probably 2 weeks. And then the second piece I would add is that we are continuing to work on student home connectivity issues using the Khajiit smart spots, which we discussed in a previous meeting, for those students who have no other data connectivity options, as well as other connectivity improvements that we're putting in place in our schools as well. So yes, I think we are developing a good suite of options for kids who have a variety of connectivity issues.
Thank you.
Okay. We have 2 more trustees on the speakers list. Trustee Parisian, you have the floor.
Thank you. I've received a question regarding one of our documents regarding technical support. And one of the documents that is out there for students and parents, I'm not too sure if the document myself reflects those that are asynchronous or synchronous learners, but it's indicated here in the document, basically, that I'll read it in a second, that if a student has technical issues, they would contact their teacher, and the teacher would go to IT support. Now, it's hard for the teacher to know, like, if the student, if it's their home computer, their home setup, would it still be the teacher or would it be the parent? As it states in the document, if a student requires technical support during remote learning, this should be communicated with their virtual class teacher. If the teacher is unable to solve the problem, the teacher will communicate with this directly with the UCDSB IT department, who will either address the issue or pass it to the distance learning support team to follow up. So the classroom teacher will have the ability to monitor this process and update the families as needed. So currently we're asking our teachers to do quite a bit. I'm wondering if this is just for the online asynchronous only, or is this also for the synchronous learners?
So through you, Chair, our intention is not for the teacher to be spending a great deal of time troubleshooting either IT issues, certainly not connectivity issues. But what we wanted to do was have that initial filter for, it may have just been a misunderstanding on the part of the student or the parent about a particular function of MS Teams that could be clarified in a moment, right, with a brief conversation or a quick email. And so we didn't want to create a circumstance where circumstances and concerns about related to the technology were coming forward and potentially could have been resolved practically instantaneously by a brief conversation. So it would not be our intent that teachers would be spending, extended time resolving issues, but that would be kind of the first chain, and then they would provide it to us and we would certainly be following up. If it was a technical issue, the IT department is the appropriate source. If it's something related to the functionality of our board supported tools like MS Teams or D2L, the distance learning team has a significant amount of capability with regards to the applications of those tools, and they would probably the best ones to provide that training and support that the parent at home may be needing.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Swan, you have the floor.
Yes, I have a question, bouncing off my last question about how many students are doing synchronous learning through you, Chair. If I got the numbers right, we have 1,300 synchronous learners in the K-8 panel, and this pertains to my motion, but I'd love to know this answer because I couldn't get this earlier and we still don't have the data. But let's just say 900 of those learners in the K-8 panel, as a guesstimate, are in the K-6 model. How much money would it cost us to hire teachers to move them to a virtual classroom for 900 students? in the K-6 model.
Mr. Chair, through you, this is Stephen speaking. I wanted to just comment on two things, and then I'll ask Superintendent Ferguson to comment further. There are three things I think that would be important for the board to be aware of, and in the question that the trustee posed. One is the HR requirements that would mean in the proposed idea that the trustee just floated a moment ago, that we would need to restaff schools, transition those teachers to the virtual school environment, and then collapse classes and create classes. So there's a function, a timeline, and a cost, and I would just ask Mr. Ferguson to comment about that. What I would want to bring to the attention of the board is that there's also an operational implication for engaging in the timelines of doing that, collapsing classes, remixing students, and then continuing on with school operations during a period of COVID. And that, trustees, is that right now, and certainly over the duration of the series of board meetings that we've had this summer, staff have highlighted that the number one requirement is to create cohorts of students that are more or less fixed in place, and that whether we're talking about by grade as a cohort or by a time period in our secondary schools. And our requirement is to try to reduce any likelihood of mixing and having those students interacting with each other outside of their cohort. If we were to staff a virtual school, the board would be required to find those resources to the greatest extent possible in a regular day school operation right now. In diverting those teachers to the virtual school, then we'll have to collapse classes because we would not have the same number of teachers in our schools, and therefore be combining those grades or those classes. In doing that, then we are actually going contrary to and disrupting the cohort, and that presents a problem in terms of daily health and safety. And we know that that's not the direction that the province has provided to school districts, and all of our plans and our operational plans have been very careful to underline the need to keep those cohorts straight and to minimize any changes or disruptions to any and to the greatest extent possible. So I just wanted to flag that before Superintendent Ferguson was to comment, because the trustee's comment was about staffing and potential costs. But what I wanted to highlight for the board as well is that in addition to those key elements, there is also an operational consideration that is absolutely paramount for the board to be to have in full view in any kind of discussion about changes to the day school that would result in supporting a virtual synchronous school. That's I think at the base of the question that the trustee asked a moment ago.
Can I just provide clarification? I think that was a bit off topic on what I was trying to clarify. Is I was just, my motion is proposing to remove the synchronous learners from the K-6 model. So I'm specifically talking about removing those 2 or 3 kids from each classroom in the K-6 model. I'm not talking about changing cohorts, because my understanding is that class size under this model was going to remain. But yes, you may have to change classes, but I just want to say I'm talking specifically about just making the virtual classroom for those synchronous learners, of which there's
Chair. Chair, point of order.
Chair McPherson, we have a point of order being raised. Are you online?
Okay, my apologies. I just got booted by my internet, so I'm back on. So Could somebody fill me in on the 90 seconds of blank time?
Mr. Chair, through you, there was a response to the trustee's question. The trustee provided a clarification, and then Mr. Chair, you have another member of the trustee table raising a point of order at this time.
Okay, could we get the point of order made again? Because my apologies, I missed it.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I have no issue with the line of questioning or the thoughts of of Trustee Swan. However, I think we are delving into the motion. If we're going to talk about the motion, let's put it on the floor.
Okay, I will stand by your point of order. We will keep the discussion to the presentation, and we will deal with discussion on the motion when it is put on the floor. Any further questions on the presentations?
Yeah, can I please have, it's Trustee Swan, the clarification from the superintendent as per what you probably missed, and I wasn't your fault because of losing connectivity. He did refer, Director Sliwa referred this to, I think, Superintendent Ferguson in regards to my previous question.
Okay, Ron, could you fill in the blanks for us?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in response to Trustee Swan's question and what also was suggested by the director, if we're looking at the K-6, as Trustee Swan has stated, and looking at creating a virtual school to go along with a first face-to-face school, that will require reorging the schools, and it would require staffing those virtual schools. So the timelines given our normal procedures and our current procedures for an undertaking of that magnitude would take us into early October. However, we find ourselves in unusual times, and we are there may be opportunities. I don't want to speak, but there may be opportunities to perhaps shorten those timelines. In other situations, we have had the ability to sometimes shorten those, but again, this is just hypothetical. Lots of discussions to be had there. And under those scenarios, we might be able to shorten the timeline for reorging all the schools and the K-6 schools and restaffing them. We may be able to shorten that by a few weeks, and it would take us into late September. There is no scenario where we would be able to reorg and create the virtual school for K-6 and have that ready to go for the September 11th timeline. But you know, we may be able to meet other timelines in September, depends on how we go. But just important for folks to be aware of that. Normally, that type of staffing, we're talking on timelines of months, given
Okay.
And a guesstimate on the cost was the part that wasn't answered, please.
Okay. Ron, you're breaking up real bad here. We have over 500 people watching this meeting, so I imagine our bandwidth is really getting stretched tonight. So Ron, if you're still there, can you proceed again? We seem to have lost Ron. Does anyone else feel comfortable responding to Trustee Swan's question?
Mr. Chair, through you, we'll ask if Superintendent Hobbs could field the comment for a moment based on the comments of Superintendent Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Director Sliwa. You know, I think that first of all, I'd preface this by saying, like, I really am reluctant to sort of cost things on the fly in a public board setting. I mean, it's a serious exercise that we take quite seriously, and so I'm really reluctant to kind of throw these things around without giving them due consideration. I would say that the best basis that we have to start with would be one of the estimates that I referred to last week in the presentation on the finance, which was that when we looked at putting all the people in a virtual school who might be interested in synchronous learning, and I believe that number was around 4,200 people total K-12 at that time, you're talking $21 to $23 million to start, not including replacement costs for people who are sick. And since that time, what we've done is modeled out what the impact would be if we allowed students to migrate back and forth between an in-class setting and a virtual school. And what we noted at that time was that even though you would think that if a student goes from an in-class setting to a virtual school and a student goes from a virtual school back to an in-class setting, that would completely offset. In fact, that would rarely occur where you would have a nice fit. And so what would necessarily happen is that you would be, every time you did one of those rounds of giving people the option to move back and forth, you would be incurring further staffing costs. So the moral of the story for us is that it's not just about what it costs on day one, but what it costs based on the sort of known and unknown evolution of the COVID pandemic throughout the year, how we're going to have to move resources and students around from a virtual environment on an ongoing basis, what we anticipate to be sick leave provisions. So we know we have well-established data through School Boards Cooperative Inc. that tells us what the typical annual averages are for employee groups absenteeism due to short-term sick leave. And quite frankly, we anticipate that that's going to be higher than normal this year, although we haven't yet budgeted for how high that's going to be because we don't really have visibility into it. So, I think as a general rule, like what I would do is maybe Ron's back, but I would defer to Ron to talk to speak to the number of teachers that were required. But I think on average, the way we would start would be about $100,000 per teacher on average. And then on top of that, you have to account for the fact that there would be sick leave, there would be technology costs, PD costs, and so on. And particularly, I would say extensive PD costs, because my feeling is likely the teachers you would hire for a virtual school are going to be new teachers or off our supply roster who don't have a lot of experience with either the technology platforms or the pedagogy. So what I would suggest, perhaps maybe if Superintendent Ferguson is back, he could give you an estimate on perhaps the number of teachers, and as a starting point, $100,000 a teacher would be a multiplication factor that you could use to get a rough estimate, barring all those other costs I spoke about.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure you can hear me all right.
Yes, we hear you now.
Great. So just what I was mentioning was that around timelines, if we're looking at a K-6 school and trying to move the students into virtual, under normal circumstances and following all of our normal procedures and in alignment with all of our existing collective agreements, the timeline you'd be looking at to be able to start that up and have things running and folks in schools wouldn't be until early October. However, we do find ourselves in a unique situation, an emergency situation, and we have become quite good at finding ways to do things on shorter timelines. We are in continual discussions with our union groups, and I don't want to speak for them, but if there is the possibility of collapsing some of those timelines to do things on an expedited timeline, under those scenarios, we could probably have this ready to go for the end of September. There is no scenario where reorging all of the K-6 classes and launching the virtual school for those folks would be done on the September 11th timeline. But as I said, we certainly would work to try to do that in an expedited fashion. Would be some discussions to be had to try to do that, but that's something we could work towards if that was the will of the board. Just to frame it for people, under normal circumstances, this kind of undertaking, we would be talking about months. And so what I'm saying is that I'm hopeful we could condense that to weeks, but there is certainly no possibility of doing it in a matter of days. And as for the number of teachers, I've not run a scenario of just collapsing K-6. We did in creating the virtual schools. We did look at K-8 and you're upwards of 150 to 175 teachers. Then with collapsing, we were able to find potentially 60, so you might still be in the range of 100 for K to 8. If you shorten that to K to 6, perhaps, and again, these are just very ballpark numbers here I'm giving, perhaps you'd need 60 to 80. Using Mr. Hobbs's figures there, you're in the ballpark of $6 to $8 million. But again, that's very high level, and I wouldn't want to be held to those numbers. This is just, again, we have not scaled it out for a K to 6 model. That's not a model we've developed. We have developed models for, K to 8, and so that data is based on that. Hopefully that answers the trustees' questions.
Thank you. I'm ready to bring forward my motion if no one has any more questions.
Okay, we'll just do one more poll around the table. Going once, going twice, going 3 times.
I'd like one more question.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Based on Mr. Lozon's answer to the question about any other board doing the model that we are talking about, it would be my interpretation that we are the only school board in Ontario that is doing this synchronous learning and through the regular classroom teacher. Is that correct?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, through you,
yes.
it's
Go
Stephen
ahead.
here. So, Mr. Chair, just to bring back the earlier comment, one of the superintendents had mentioned that in the Eastern Ontario area, we know of one other board that is doing that. We do not have the information based on what's happening provincially. We could get that information in about a week's time because, as you know, different boards are still changing their models as we speak based on feedback from the Ministry of Education and also their startup time and also on topics related to affordability. But right now, what we know in the Eastern Ontario region, there is at least one other board that is doing that. Provincially, we'd have to get back to the Board of Trustees with that info.
Okay, thank you. No further comments? Okay, we have a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board set up a virtual school for all students in the synchronous K to 6 model. Moved by Lisa Swan, seconded by John Danaher. Lisa, you care to speak to the motion?
Yes, I'd love to, and thank you. There's so many factors here, and I've received so many comments from parents, educators, grandparents, and I guess the reason I'm putting this forward is when the model came that we would do a virtual school for K to 12, it was unaffordable. But I think in the K to 6 model, we have our youngest learners, and they need the utmost attention. And as much as it's great for all our learners that are synchronous learning to be in with their cohorts and their classrooms and their friends, I think these young students make new friends really easy and can adapt to this model. I think that using this model will help our teachers teach their classes so our students in the classroom get the best benefit of in-school education possible. I also think that our students doing the synchronous model will get a better experience. I have heard that, and it has been encouraged through our health unit, we heard last week, to do outdoor learning. It's going to happen a lot more, I think, in the secondary panel from what I've heard from teachers. And having a synchronous class in the secondary panel is not going to include those students because it's really difficult. I mean, we have connectivity issues tonight. It's difficult to take communications outside. Many schools are struggling with connectivity issues in their schools already. So if we can remove this small cohort of our youngest learners and put them in our virtual school through TR Leger. I think this would be a benefit to all, the teachers, our students, and that's, I guess, the start of my comment on this one. And the cost factor is down so much lower when and I'm guesstimating from the 1,300 in the K-8 that it might be 900. The number we're hearing now is, and I not holding anyone to this because they haven't had a chance to crunch real numbers, and I did try to get real numbers ahead of time, but the deadline was only today to get the information to the board. So I know we're all working under extremely difficult situations, but I would like to propose this to my fellow trustees to please support me in keeping our youngest learners in a virtual platform through TR Leger and allowing our teachers to teach the kids in that grade, K-6, in their classrooms and give them the utmost support. Thank you.
Okay. Trustee Schooler has a question.
Through you, Chair. I'm against the motion. I do have a question, though. We've been told that any reorganization of any magnitude would involve significant cost. It would also back up the school year to, at the very best, the end of September. We've already told our parents that we were not able to start on September the 4th. I'm wondering if there would be any effect on programming with a reorganization. And I think specifically of the delivery of French language. How would a reorganization affect core French and French immersion?
Director Sliwa, can you direct us to the proper superintendent?
Mr. Chair, I think I would like to begin, please, with Superintendent Lowshaw commenting from the day school side of things, and Superintendent Rudders to be talking about this from the remote learning side of things.
Through you, Vice Chair McPherson. One of the benefits of the existing model is that it does allow for a broad range of program opportunities. And as you may recall, there were some program limitations with the previous model in terms of the way in which it was outlined. And part of that was specific to certain courses or programs, and one of those was with French programming. And so certainly with the model that we're looking at, a number of parents seem pleased, not only with the ability to move back and forth from face to face, but with an assurance that they would receive French instruction.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Through you, Chair. So is the answer to that question then that with the reorganization there would not be French instruction?
Through you, Vice Chair McPherson, simply stating that with the existing model, then students we would ensure that there was French instruction through the synchronous remote synchronous model. And I'm going to ask Superintendent Rudders to comment on or to share her thinking around what it would look like in the in a restructured virtual school model.
Thank you, Superintendent Lowshaw, and through you, Chair. So we would anticipate that there would be impact on our full ability to maintain French immersion programming in the virtual school. What we would see needing to happen should we proceed with a plan to take the K-6 students and put them totally into a synchronous, independent virtual program synchronously that is divorced from their connection to the home school and the in-person classmates. We would be in a position of having to reorganize our K-6 schools and potentially in an efforts to secure teachers who could then be assigned to the virtual program to serve those 900 students or whatever the estimate may be. And as a result, essentially, we are concerned, as we were in our prior model, with our ability to secure enough qualified French teachers to offer a program in the mainstream school and at the same time in the virtual synchronous program from K to 6.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee McDonald, do you have a question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you. More comments, perhaps, but I'll lead off with the comment first. And I'm not in favor of this motion either. I think, based on the information that we heard from staff, a lot of the initial concerns that I heard from parents and staff and other individuals have been addressed. And as I said earlier, I'm confident that this is going to be a plan that allows for that transition to take place and allows for the connection to be maintained. The concerns that Trustee Swan brings up for the purpose of the motion are no different than the concerns that she raised with the synchronous model, with having a homeschool model. They still exist in this model. The only difference is that we're going to spend millions of dollars hiring more teachers and having less connection with the homeschool, having less connection with their friends and students that they would typically go to school with. So I can't support this. I simply don't think that this is a right model for us to move towards. And furthermore, I have some questions, but I really think it might be best served if we were in private session, because they are around labor and collective agreement. But I just want to point out that we do have a situation where we're saying that we only want to have K to 6 this way, but the teachers that are in that same collective bargaining unit now also teach grade 7 and 8. And so, we're going to have a mix between teachers in a K to 6 school, and we do have some schools that are still K to 8, and other teachers that are in the same bargaining unit but happen to be in a different building teaching grade 7 and 8. So extreme concern over that piece, and all the concerns that we had previously have been addressed. And I think this is a motion that needs to be defeated, and we need to move on and set some confidence in the system that we have a good model, and make sure that parents are able to move forward knowing what we're going to be delivering whenever their students, their sons and daughters, enter the school.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions?
Yes, I have a further comment.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Though this is very challenging. I just want to say that the model that I'm proposing is the exact same model that the Catholic School Board of Eastern Ontario is using to deal with their online learning and remote learning model. So I did speak to a trustee from there today, or should I say vice chair of the board, and he confirmed it, and that's what they're doing, the K to 6 model. So thank you very much, and I am supportive of this, obviously.
Okay, any further comments or questions from the floor?
Yes, I do, Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Chair McAllister.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm just going to turn on my video here. Okay, here we go. The board has been on record for some time now to entertain a virtual learning school since January 2018. The differences between an e-learning school versus a dedicated virtual school in 4 days. That is problematic. The board, I don't believe the board is opposed to moving in this direction, but there are some problems. The difference is that is in the timeline. We have been moving towards this goal, but as e-learning, but not as a synchronous model format, and that is the difference. And we have been in this model since August the 13th. It's complicated, it's sophisticated, and the problem is that it would be highly disruptive. It would cost a tremendous amount of money. I'm not sure we have that kind of money. This is a broader range than what we had on the radar for our future planning for several years. And the implementation is risky in such a short time. There's also health risk involved for our students because we are restaffing schools, stopping instruction, collapsing classes, and doing all kinds of things for which we are frankly not prepared at this point. So while I have a great deal of sympathy for Trustee Swan's motion, I would like to move an amendment, and my amendment is the following: that the director report on the feasibility of this motion by no later than November the 25th, 2020. I do not have a seconder.
Do we have a seconder to the motion, to the amendment?
I will, Chair.
Seconded by Trustee Cram. Okay, Lisa, can you post the amendment so that I can read it?
Well, since I brought this motion forward, can I say I don't agree to an amendment and this is a new motion?
It is an unfriendly amendment.
That being the case, Chair, I withdraw my amendment.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification.
Yes, go ahead, Trustee McDonald.
The purpose of a motion to amend, it does not need to be friendly. It needs to be germane. And if it is germane, whether the original mover or seconder agree or not, it still can be tabled or put on the table. So as long as Trustee McAllister or Chair McAllister gets a seconder, it should still be permitted unless you deem it to be not germane to the original motion.
Now, I was going to allow it. Unfriendly amendments are as legal as friendly amendments. And so are you still going to place your motion forward, Chair McAllister?
Yes, I will, if I have a seconder.
Okay, Trustee Cram, you seconded it the first time. Do you still stand by that decision?
Yes.
Okay. We have an amendment to the original motion that the director report on this motion by no later than November 25th, 2020. Moved by John McAllister, seconded by Donald Cram. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, through you, it's Stephen.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Could I ask, Mr. Chair, what the board would like us to report on? Is it the feasibility? Is it about the pedagogical value? Is it about the costs? I guess that would help us so that the motion is clear about what you're asking staff to report back on.
Thank you. Could we seek some clarification, Chair McAllister?
Good question. I guess all of the above is what I would say. The feasibility, the cost, the implementation schedule, those would be some of my issues.
Thank you. I have a question on procedure. If this motion, this amendment stands, will that essentially delay the original motion until after the report is received on November 25th, 2020? I will need a wee bit of parliamentarian advice here.
Mr. Chair, through you, and I'll leave that open to any other trustee who may wish to comment. From a procedural point of view, the motion now is about the staff providing a report. Depending on what the board thought of that report, they could decide to move to direct staff to proceed with creating that model, or there may be some other motion from that. But I think right now what the board is asking through the or present motion is now not to have an implementation, but to study the feasibility of the implementation, if I've heard that correctly. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Distinctly yes, go ahead.
Vice Chair McPherson, that's exactly
Yes.
the way I interpret it. It is not a move to implement, but simply to report on.
Okay. So, any questions from the table on clarity and intent? Essentially, this will moot the original motion that it will not be dealt with until after a report is received on November 25th, 2020. Any further comment or questions from the floor?
Bill, I have one.
Go ahead.
I think its delay is to deny. Thank you.
Right there. I mean, who's over there?
Chair, I'm not certain that's true. Just because we're delaying it and get the facts and get the stuff that comes with it, doesn't mean we're denying it. It just means we want to get some information first before we decide.
Okay. Any further comment or question, or does somebody wish to respond to that? Okay.
Mr. Chair, it's Stephen here.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So just confirming, out of our parliamentary procedures, we have a motion to amend. We have a seconder. You've opened the floor up for a debate. It requires a majority vote, as the trustees would know. And now this motion takes precedence over what the main motion was. I just wanted to confirm that, Mr. Chair, from the procedural side of things.
Okay. So, point of clarification. If this motion passes, it essentially renders the original motion redundant. So, okay, I will assume that we will go ahead and vote on the original motion, even though it will actually have no effect. I don't have my Sturgis with me, so.
Mr. Chair, through you.
Yes.
It's Stephen again. Our parliamentary procedure indicates that the amended motion takes precedence over the main motion, and the motion that is really the motion. There is the amended motion is now the motion. The previous initial motion is no longer on the table.
Okay, thank you. I have my direction. I will call the vote unless there is any more questions or comments. Okay, please cast your ballots online via board docs.
Vice Chair McPherson, I am just preparing the motion right now.
Okay, thank you. Still waiting for it to come up.
Vice Chair McPherson, I am sending it through the chat. I want you to confirm, or Director Sliwa, before I post it to board docs, please.
Okay, just a sec. Let me get over to that screen. Okay, I shall read what I have got. That the director report on the feasibility, the cost, and the implementation schedule related to the setup of a virtual school for all students in the synchronous K-6 model. The report would be presented to the board by no later than November 25th, 2020. That is the motion as presented. I will again ask you to cast your ballots.
Chair McPherson, the voting is open.
Thank you.
Chair McAllister, or sorry, Chair McPherson, that motion does carry. 9 in favor, 2 opposed.
Okay. Motion amendment is carried. And I'm going to be real popular with what I'm going to say next, but the original motion is now moot and invalid in that the amendment contradicts the original motion. Okay, thank you. And I guess we can move on to item number, oh, wrong sheet, sorry, 5.03. And it was with great pleasure I return the chair to Chair McAllister.
If I'm not mistaken, I think I had a motion there on the floor too. Bill.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, just a sec. I'm sorry, John, my apologies.
Oh, no problem. No problem. See if we get a seconder even.
Okay. Okay. We have a motion. Be it resolved that the Upper Canada District School Board will not expect teachers who are facilitating on-site learning and actively monitoring pandemic protocols to these same students at considerable risk to all involved to also deliver live streaming to remote learners. The motion seems a little redundant with what just happened, but I will entertain a mover and a seconder.
Well, I move it.
Moved by John McCrae. Do we have a seconder? Do we have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second it just because it's very similar to what's redundant of my motion now, but I'll always take a second kick at the can because I don't give up.
Okay. Seconded by Trustee Swan. Any discussion to the motion that is now on the table? Okay. John, do you care to speak to the motion as the mover?
Well, there's not too much else to say, except that I think that in this model, those students that are in the class may suffer, and but it's pretty much been talked to. That's my final point.
Okay. Any further discussion? Comments? If not, I
have a comment, and I'm going to concur. I think students will miss out in this, especially the elementary panel students will miss out in this. And I think it's going to be very challenging and a lot of stress put on our teachers. And we already talked about sick leave. And I just think that we are really, everybody's in this situation, but this is an unreasonable expectation in a classroom for our teachers. Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? Any further comments or questions? Any further comments or questions? Going once, 3 times. Lisa, can you post the motion on board docs, and I will ask trustees to vote virtually.
Vice Chair McPherson, the voting is open.
Thank you very much.
Awaiting one more vote from Trustee Jacobs. Oh, okay. Vice Chair McPherson, the motion has been defeated. 3 in favor, 7 opposed, 1 abstain.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we're again at that point in the evening where I will hand over the chair to Chair McAllister.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. You did a great job there, handling a very delicate but good situation. We're going to move on now to item 503, which is the update on funding sources to respond to projected costs with regard to COVID-19. And I will turn this over to Superintendent of Business Services, Mr. Hobbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to again bring forward a brief update with regard to the available funding sources that we have identified as potential sources to support our COVID-19 response. As you recall, last week's special board meeting, I had the opportunity to bring to you an update, and really, I think recognizing the time and also the fact that we're a mere week out from the last update, there isn't an awful lot that has happened. So it's an opportunity for me to, I think, recapitulate a little bit of the position we were in. It's an opportunity for me to more formally, I think, identify some sources of funding that I touched on orally in the last meeting, and also maybe walk you through a little bit more detail in the report that I have in the board package as well. So just to be very brief, as you recall, the process of us identifying funding sources that we could apply toward the COVID response has been an ongoing process dating back to early in the budget process, recognizing the uncertainty we are facing this year. Over the course of the last particularly month or so, we've actually received a number of memos from the Ministry of Education that provided funding sources that generously supplement and enhance those early opportunities for funding that we identified through the budget process. Namely, on August 14th, we got a B11 memo from the Ministry of Education that provided, at the time of last week's report, about $1.3 million in additional funding. In the budget process, we identified between $900,000 and $4.7 million in regular GSN funding that we could apply to the COVID-19 response from both 1920 and the 2021 school year. We received further guidance from the ministry on August 14th. That provided the opportunity for us to apply our accumulated surplus to a maximum of 2% of our gross operating revenue in 2021. So that would be essentially spending ourselves into a deficit of up to around $6.5 million for 2021, and therefore drawing down on our accumulated surplus. And then again on August 25th and 26th, we received further guidance from the ministries itemizing the UCDSB share and breakdown of funding that the ministry provided us, or sorry, the federal government provided us. And then further, again, memos B13 and I believe B14 on funding sources related to ventilation and further support for transportation. So moving on, in your board package, table 1, what you see there is something very similar to what you saw last week, but row 3 has been updated. So in row 1, we talked about we had identified some uncommitted staffing supports that were related to contractual obligations. And again, to quickly recap, as you know, through the settlement of collective agreements with CUPE, OSSTF, and ETFO centrally over the course of the past year, the government agreed to some additional funding sources that came with the settlement of those collective agreements, and we do have some of that money available to us in the 2020-21 school year that, in theory, provided that we could spend that within the constraints within the collective agreement, we could potentially use that to support some of our COVID response, and that is about $2.96 million. As I mentioned earlier, in the budget process for 2021, we identified between $900,000 and $4.7 million in funding or revenue that we had in our plans that could be applied towards the COVID response, and that was a low end with high degree of certainty of $900,000 all the way up to $4.7 million in the event that things like SIP funding and those kinds of things are come through for us and are realized in this year, which we haven't yet heard, but feel confident about. And then row 3, this is the line that was updated. So COVID-related funding supports, and that really encompasses the memos I spoke of earlier, August 4th, August 14th, August 25th, August 26th. Now is totaling about $6.6 million in funding for a total of a potential of $4.365 million, recognizing that middle row of $4.7 million, there's still some uncertainty there about whether we're going to realize that full amount. So that's the upside potential. I also obviously haven't considered within this amount the potential drawdown of our accumulated surplus available for compliance that would be available should the board choose to spend up to the 2% limit that was specified in the August 14th memo, which would add approximately another $6.5 million to that $14.365 million, and would really exhaust our capacity to spend in this particular school year. So this amount, if we actually included deficit spending, it would represent around $21 million, and that would really represent turning over every couch cushion and looking under every pillow for every dime that we have that we could conceivably put towards the COVID response, and would leave us with precious little room to adapt to change throughout the year should we commit all of that in this particular moment. So what I thought I'd do tonight in order to distinguish this a little bit from last week's report would be just to very briefly walk you through essentially what we've done in subsequent tables in your package is we've tried to blow up those 3 rows so that you get a better sense of where those dollar values come from and how they're earmarked. Because I think an important thing for us to recognize is that, for example, while in row 3, we have approximately $6.65 million identified there. That's not that $6.65 million is broken down into packages, if you will, that come with strings or that are expected to be spent in targeted ways based on sort of ministry direction. And I think in quite fairness, I think we've had some conversations this evening about some areas of significant expense, but we also know based on the trustees' stated priorities last week that there are lots of other areas of expense that we would need to incur in order to make sure that we are ready to operate schools. And that could be from PPE to ventilation systems to enhanced transportation to even additional things like spec ed supports and all kinds of other areas that are necessary to have a well-rounded and comprehensive support for our students. So moving on to table 2, which is in the second page of your package, this is where we have broken out those that row 1 of the previous table, which talks about uncommitted staffing supports related to contractual obligations. So at the bottom, you'll see the total available there as per the first table is $2.968 million. And then the actual breakdown of that is provided in here. So during our budget presentation for 2021, I spoke to supports for student funds, which were a significant infusion of funding associated with the settlement of the collective agreement. Largely comes with strings in the sense that they are to go towards staffing for the respective employee groups and with a particular focus on special education supports for students. In the second part of this slide, you'll also notice that last year, as a result of the COVID pandemic, we were unable to, as expected, spend some of the CUPE money that we had available in the 1920 school year that was intended to go towards reinstatement of staff that had been previously laid off. So the ministry is quite generously, instead of just saying you weren't able to spend it last year so because of COVID, so you don't get it, they've given us a prorated amount in this fiscal year, in addition to the education worker protection funding and systems priorities funding for CUPE that we have for 2021. This is in addition to compensate us and the union for the fact that we were unable to spend that funding last year. And again, this comes with strings. There may be some negotiation and obviously some communication we have to do with the union about how to deploy that. But in theory, it is possible for us with the union's agreement that we would be able to apply that towards some element of the COVID response as it does expire, I believe, next August 31st. Moving forward to table 3 then, Table 3 corresponds to the second row in Table 1. So this is a recap of the contingencies that we identified during the 2021 budget process. We talked about, and what we've done here, the finance team has sort of identified what they feel is the likelihood of these various amounts coming to fruition. So in here we have some deferred revenue associated with library staff, which was an under expenditure. There is a tutoring allocation that's associated, some deferred revenue there, experiential learning revenue that was currently deferred. And some of these things just have to do with the fact that we were interrupted in the COVID response last year and didn't have an opportunity to execute the planned expenditures against these lines. And therefore, these lines are now available for us to defer into revenue for 2021. There is some remaining unspent 2021 rural and northern education funds. As you may recall, that we've applied some of that in-year funding for distance ed support already, and also for grad coaches. And there also is some 2019-20 rural and northern education fund there as well, $1.4 million. And again, that SIP revenue that we are all waiting on with bated breath. As you know, we have budgeted very conservatively $750,000, although we've done about $3.1 million in applications for SIP funding, and we are really hoping that extra $2.35 million materializes. So in here we have up to $4.748 million that we could apply in theory towards COVID responses, provided that the actual proposed expenditures align well with the constraints that are associated with each of these lines. Moving forward to the following table, I won't drain this entire table, but Table 4 provides you with a summary of the COVID-related funding supports to date. So the August 4th B11 memo, I think we've summarized that one fairly well here. There are some items where we were ineligible for additional funding, some items where we may be waiting to see what the outcome is going to be. With respect to things like PPE, we may not actually receive funding directly for PPE, but instead the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services, which is actually quarterbacking and providing PPE to school boards on behalf of the Ontario government, they may be compensated directly on our behalf, so we may not actually receive that funding. But in here, what you see is how these lines break down. So funding for additional custodial positions, as you know, we're actually in the process of hiring to eliminate split shifts and gaps, and in coverage for schools, so that we have custodians in schools and present whenever students are, in addition to before and after, to prepare in advance and clean after kids have left the schools. And we're also looking at applying some additional staff so that if we have higher than expected absenteeism, we aren't at the risk of not being able to provide coverage for a school that needs it. So hiring people to be on call, essentially. There's another critical component here is health and safety training, up to $129,000. With regard to student transportation, which to me would be a flow through to STEO, this would be supporting their cleaning supplies and protocols. So again, trying to support STEO's additional costs associated with transportation. With regard to special education, again, staffing or non-staffing resources associated with supporting the COVID response. Mental health, I think the mental health may be in here twice, actually. Oh, not a duplicate, I'm sorry. Additional money for technology. Again, that was announced in June. You may recall that there was a $25 million funding announcement around the time of the GSN, province-wide $25 million combined for mental health and technology. There's some announced $51,000 for enhanced cleaning allocations. And that really represents what we see as the subtotal to date of what our board share for those respective lines. Moving on to August 14th memo, again, ventilation, $860,000 of ventilation. I think I did touch on last week a little bit about what our planned spend is on that in facilities, or at least for the majority of it. And I'd be happy to speak to that as required by the board in order to talk about what the plan is, but we do have a plan that's in motion. There's a remote learning funding amount of $413,000. And this is really around school leadership for virtual schools or for distance and synchronous learning. So this is really around principals and school admin support. You know, again, B14 memo from August 26, additional teaching staff. So this is, again, the note is really a direct quote. One-time funding is for non-permanent teachers and supply teachers, and the funding should be used for time-limited positions. So again, this is not the kind of thing for hiring permanent teachers necessarily, but it may be to provide supplements where needed on a small scale. School open, and these are actually amounts that are really related coming out of the federal allocation that you'll recall being announced. School opening, reopening emerging issues, about $1.3 million. And again, I would say in this particular area, quite a lot of latitude for us to apply that in ways that are you know, suited to our local needs. Transportation, again, another amount from the federal government for transportation of $795,000. And then further money to support remote learning. And then finally, at the end here, additional special education and mental health amounts. So the total of those amounts are about $6.6 million. And this, as you'll recall from the discussion last week, really represents the most substantial change from the table that you saw last week, although I did orally discuss most of these changes in the presentation last week, but we did feel it was important for you to have this in writing so you know what the status is as of today. The grand total, again, $14.3 million. And again, if I were to say that, if I were to actually leave you with one impression, I think it sounds like a lot of money, but when you actually look at how it's broken down and the associated constraints, it's very helpful because it gives us a guide to the sheer breadth of the response that's necessary across our district and all the various operational areas in order to not just you know, provide instruction to students, but also to provide the learning, a safe learning environment with all the essential supports. So that's, I think, instructive, but it also is instructive that it is quite heavily subdivided and does come with constraints, which may make it more challenging in some respects to address some of our aspirations that we might have, although we certainly are appreciative of the amount. And finally, on top of that, of course, is our ability to spend into a deficit throughout the year. That's not something that has to be decided today, but the board, in response to evolving conditions, may choose to do that at any time during the year and any amount up to the chosen 2%. And we would be happy to support that decision when the time comes. But this represents the conclusion to my report for this evening, and I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Hobbs. Trustees, do you have any questions?
Mr. Chair, Trustee Swan has a question.
Go ahead, Trustee Swan.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I am a visual learner and I'm finding it really difficult to follow tonight because I'm not seeing the slides one by one, and I can't listen and flip back and forth between platforms, but I guess I won't be the only one with that problem. I want to say that supporting our teachers is supporting our students. And my question is, what are we spending to support our teachers that are teaching synchronous learners in their classrooms? Because I couldn't find it because no specific slide was up when Superintendent Hobbs addressed it. So I'd like to hear the answer to this.
Perhaps I'll start, and then the director may choose to redirect, or the chair may choose to redirect my question to another number of my colleagues. The purpose of our report this evening was, I think, mostly from my perspective, to actually show the board the actual financial position and what is available for us to spend. And I think that, you know, having clarity about the actual instructional model that we'll be pursuing for the course of the year will be helpful in helping Superintendent Rudders and Superintendent Loshaw, as well as the entire team, further sort of develop their plans for how we're going to support teachers. I certainly know that from my brief conversations or my participation in conversations with the senior team, that not only is the instructional model front of mind, but also the question of how we're going to support that instructional model in a way that's meaningful and tangible to our teachers and students. But to speak further to the specifics, I might actually defer to the director at the chair's pleasure to perhaps either respond or redirect.
I believe, frankly, trustees, that we've already discussed this issue. Unless I'm misreading this, correct me if I'm wrong, Trustee Swan, but this is really a report on the finances, not on the operational aspect of it.
Well, I wasn't trying to, well, I get it's finances in relation to operations, and I'm asking what of this money that we've been given additionally from the government and from the feds is being directed to support our teachers in the classroom in the synchronous model. So it's a combination of both, but I know we are not supposed to get into administration issues as a trustee, but I mean, even the trustee guide was written pre-pandemic. So I think we're in a different ground here, and that's my question. Thank you.
All right, Superintendent Hobbs, I guess the question is how much money is allocated towards the whole area of synchronous learning and teacher development and whatnot? Just broad figures.
Sure, I will take a stab at that, Mr. Chair. I think the first thing I think that would be important is to just run through the document and identify the lines that are specifically allocated towards areas that could qualify for that. So, you know, as an example, I would say that, for example, there's a line here that's around cleaning supplies, and obviously that's not a piece of funding that would be eligible for supporting supports for teachers, whether that would include central supports or training or so on. I would imagine that there may be some latitude in areas like the technology line. So in table 4, there's approximately $184,000 there that could, in theory, be applied to something like that. There may be some mechanism to apply in the amount in, let me just see here, if you continue on in table 4, under the August 14th memo, there's a remote learning funding amount of $413,361. We potentially could draw upon that for a support model that would be helpful for teachers. It's possible in theory that under the following section, the B14 memo for additional teaching staff, if there was an opportunity, for example, to hire additional teaching staff to support instruction in the classroom or to assist teachers in the instructional model, there's $911,000 there. The school opening emerging issues amount in the following line, which is about $1.2 million, could conceivably be applied towards that, as could the actual remote learning amount further down in the table of $188,432. And in fact, I think that there does remain some flexibility perhaps in the broader budget and maybe even further PPFs to direct money toward the support of teachers. But again, I think that I'm not really in the best position to speak to how our superintendents of schools plan to deploy resources. I can speak to the funding that's available, but I can't speak to the actual specific plans that our superintendents of schools may have and how those supports would be structured and therefore what they would cost. I can speak to, at this stage of the game, the funding that may be drawn upon as part of the support response, recognizing, I think, the full spectrum of all the things that we need to do across the organization in order to support our teachers and our students and all staff.
Superintendent Hobbs, I'd like to, I'm not sure I'm going to direct this question perhaps to the director, but you feel free to chime in if you wish. I want to focus on the Rural and Northern Education Fund, the RENF. This is a significant portion of money for our board, and well-deserved, frankly, because it's a fund to recognize the rural and northern and eastern Ontario area, and our values, our culture, and our needs. And we're looking for an equitable distribution of funding to all parts of Ontario, particularly us in Eastern Ontario. So, and we have many significant needs, and our parents and our teachers and our educators are telling us all the time that our broadband capacity requires extreme development and investment. We know that transportation is absolutely key to Eastern Ontario, and particularly to Upper Canada District School Board with 12,000 square kilometers. It's an essential service. We don't have any options for the most part. I'm looking at the third thing would be virtual learning. How can we add advantage of this fund? How can we take advantage of this? And how can we as a board further this funding? Because frankly, I'm making a political statement. Yes, I am. But it is key to Eastern Ontario. So could you comment on this, or somebody comment on this? Or?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'd be happy to begin, and then I'd ask Superintendent Hobbs to close any of those white spaces or gaps that I might have on this. First things first, I think, Mr. Chair, is just a quick reminder to the board that at its meeting on July 15th, a motion was passed advising that that some of the amounts that Mr. Hobbs had cited this evening in his report, the Rural and Northern Education Fund, Mr. Chair, that you just mentioned, and any other deferred revenue streams to be brought back to the Board of Trustees each month. And in that review, to be outlining the purpose of the funds and the plans for the funds. And so beginning this month, that's exactly what we are obliged to do, which is to be bringing to you, as you may recall in that July presentation, Mr. Chair, staff recommendations and also a updated focus on projected COVID-related expenses. With respect to specifically the Rural and Northern Education Fund, members of the board might know that we have used that in a variety of ways since its inception in 2018, 2019. And that was, we had used and diverted those funds to build a capacity in rural schools, rural secondary schools, around rural guidance counselors. And so we used that as top up for staffing that particular program area and providing training over a 2-year period. Last year, Mr. Chair, we originally earmarked some of those dollars towards special education teachers for rural schools that qualified. I believe that under that grant, we have 62 schools that, based on the criteria for that fund, generate that fund, and therefore the application of that fund would be germane or aligned with those specific schools. Apart from that, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to flag for the board that your question and the broader question about proposed commitments for many of the funds that Mr. Hobbs brought forward in his report tonight would be coming to you later this month in one of the 2 board meetings that we'll have, because certainly we'll have a more clear view of that. Over to Mr. Hobbs to see if he has any other further comments.
Mr. Chair, I have absolutely nothing to add unless there are further questions for me on the subject.
Trustees, do you have any other questions that you'd like to direct to the director or to me?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Bill.
Thank you. Okay. In your column of COVID-related funding supports, your B11 memo of August the 4th, 2020, under funding for additional staffing teaching positions, and Upper Canada School Board not eligible due to accumulated surplus less than 2% of operating allocation. It does indicate that we are eligible for a separate top-up, but we got a big fat zero at the end of that line. So moving down to the B1 memo of August the 14th, your first column talks about accessing the top-up funding, and this must be the new math or something, because we have to spend 6 million to get 2 million. I was wondering if Superintendent Hobbs could elaborate on this process. Thank you.
Well, I will do my best, Mr. Chair, to elaborate on this process. So my understanding is that again, we would be eligible to spend up to 2% of our gross annual operating revenue, or spend ourselves into deficit to an amount equal to our gross annual operating revenue in 2020-21. And that amount of deficit would be in the neighborhood of $6.5 million. Now, that ability is contingent on having the reserves necessary to cover that amount, which, as you know, from financial forecast number 3 and from our budget, we fully expect to have at the end of August 31st, 2020. However, the point in time at which the ministry used to estimate our reserves at August 31st, 2020 was the actual revised estimate submission we did in December 2019, at which point our forecasted surplus was going to be considerably smaller. So you're absolutely right. We do have to. So that's it. Really, to me, has the eligibility has to do with when they marked the point in time, or when they sort of estimated our surplus, and that obviously was based on much earlier information back in 2019. But you're absolutely right. We actually do need to spend ourselves into deficit in order to access that funding.
Thank you.
Trustees, do you have any further questions of Trustee Hobbs or Superintendent Hobbs? Hearing none.
I posted I have one, thank you.
Go ahead, please.
So building on what Vice Chair McPherson said, what do we have to do to notify the ministry that what we projected in December was different than the actuals that were projected in, I think it was June, to notify them that we should have this money available?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're actually working with the Ministry of Education now. As you'll recall, I mentioned last week that financial forecast number 3, which was back in June, is the most recent estimate we have provided the board of what our year-to-date position is. But that is not a formal kind of exercise that we submit to the ministry in a formal way. So, you know, the real next process by which the ministry assesses our year-end position is what we're going through right now, which is assembling the year-end results and preparing for our audit of the 2019-20 fiscal year. So we're actually working with that in the ministry right now. We've submitted some clarifying questions, and that's something that we'd be happy to bring back to the board once we get a clear answer on it.
Just a quick secondary, what is the time frame?
Well, we've submitted the questions, so we're waiting and as soon as possible for the response.
Thank you. Any further questions? Ladies and gentlemen, I think this concludes our meeting. We've covered a lot of ground this evening, and I have been involved in thousands of meetings in my life, and never have I seen one with such transparency. And I am pleased that the questions posed to me, to you, and the trustees have been answered as well as possible. There will always be questions. We are in a moving flow of information, and the realities are changing. There are choices for parents and students, and we're trying to make it as easy as possible as we can for all of them. To the parents online, I as chair and you as trustees, I've asked great questions on behalf of your constituents. I sincerely hope that you, the public, feel that your concerns, where possible, have been answered. If not, please contact your school principal. If dissatisfied, contact your trustee. Saying that, you always have me as chair, and I have broad shoulders, and I will either respond or redirect for the best possible answer. So I'm seeking a motion to adjourn. Moved by?
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
Vice Chair. Moved by Trustee Swan. All in favor? I assume that motion carries.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We are offline. Bye now.